You have to judge us. Who can shoulder the immense, awesome responsibilities of the presidency? Who can put into action the plans that will make your life better?
Hillary Clinton calling on American voters to consider who can best handle the presidency. Our next guest has been weighing that question for decades. And since 1984, he has correctly picked the winner of every presidential election. Now his forecast is America will vote Trump. Here now, Alan Lichtman, an American University professor of history. So, Professor, we read your article in the Washington Post just recently. This was your prediction, but that article is old, and that was before the debate. And I'm curious if anything has transpired over the last few hours that have changed your prediction.
It certainly has hedged it even more. In the Washington Post article, I said, look, the verdict of history, which is what my keys are based on, indicates that this is a year in which the White House party, the Democrats, should lose. But I also noted in that Washington Post piece that I've hedged my prediction for the first time in more than 30 years, saying that in Donald Trump, we might have a history-shattering candidate who could change patterns that have held since 1860 in this country and have enabled me to correctly predict every election since 1984. And we saw some of those patterns on display in the debate. We saw a candidate who had a lot of trouble with truth, even challenging the moderator when the moderator pointed out, indeed, he was not against the Iraq war before it started. We saw him demeaning women by challenging the stamina of Hillary Clinton. We saw him again being the only candidate in many decades to refuse to release his tax returns. And we saw a candidate who seemed to lack the basic knowledge and temperament to be commander-in-chief. So what makes this election so fascinating is we have two competing historical forces. On the one hand, there should be a change election. We should get a Republican president. But on the other hand, we have a candidate who could shatter patterns of history because of his unique status, which we saw on display last night. And we've seen throughout this campaign with statements like he's made
really interesting. I don't mean to interrupt you, but that's interesting. The list that you mentioned are all things that we've discussed before in relation to Donald Trump. And so one wonders if we saw anything new last night that could change the trajectory. We don't know that yet. Let me ask you about your methodology. Going back to 1860, talk to our viewers about the list you created of true and false statements and how that's helped you predict the presidency.
Absolutely. I'm the world's only predicting historian. Historians usually, write about people and talk about people who are already dead. I don't do that. But I did that for developing my system. I developed it in 1981 by looking at every presidential election from 1860 when Lincoln won to 1980 when Reagan won, guided by the theory that presidential elections are primarily judgments on the performance of the party holding the White House. And from that study, I developed 13 true-false questions, which gauge primarily the strength and performance of the party holding the White House. And I developed a decision rule. These are true-false questions where an answer of true always favors the White House party. And the decision rule is if 6 or more of those 13 keys are false, the White House party is predicted to lose. And right now, the Democrats have exactly 6 keys counted against them. That's historical force number one.
Will you change your prediction as we get closer to Election Day? Because as I look down the list, for example, social unrest is number 8. And you say there is no sustained social unrest during the term. That could be true or false. If there is great social unrest that happens over the next several weeks, could something like that change your prediction completely, regardless of what either candidate do?
Great question, because I'm looking at fundamentals like social unrest, the economy, foreign policy, and 3 things can change. You put your finger on one, which would be another count against the Democrats, but correspondingly, one of the things that counts against the Democrats right now that could change is this tremendous surge in voting for Gary Johnson. That's bad for the party in power. He could fade away. And in addition, I do not give the party in power a major foreign policy triumph. It's possible, though, that if they succeed in driving ISIS out of Iraq before the election, and depending on how that is sold and how that is received, that could flip that key back in favor of the Democrats. So this is the most fluid political year, frankly, in the modern history of the country. And that's why you see this crazy polling.
And you say it's one of the most fascinating times for you, for someone that's looked at so many different elections.
Absolutely right.
Professor, it's great to have you on the program. We look forward to having you back. Let's check in and see what it looks like in the next couple of weeks. We'd love to have your assessment as things go closer to voting day. It's great to have you, Professor. Thank you.
Great to be on, and you know where to find me.